Get ready for the Bob Graham Experience.
Hey, this is Bob Graham of Spirit Point Inc., and this is the Bob Graham Experience. Today, we're going to be interviewing Neal Woodson. He's a teacher, a writer, and speaker who helps people find greater success at the intersection of inspiring leadership and effective service. Now, he's got more than 20 years of experience helping people and organizations learn more about that intersection, and he does some great work with organizations. He's also written several books, including The Uncomplicated Coach, and and we're going to use the word darn, but there's an S word that he uses in the title that I don't want to use, but you can look for it. If you want to find it online, you can go to Neal Woodson. It's NealWoodson.com. You can also look on Amazon for his two books. Neal's going to talk about how customers can be better served by small businesses, and you're not going to want to miss his hints for how to be more effective as a small business owner. All that and more, here we go.
Neal, I am so happy that you're here with me. And I should tell you, the background is not my usual background. This is actually, I'm up in Maine doing a little vacationing, but you are so important to me. I wanted to make sure we did this interview. So first of all, thank you so much for coming. I should tell people you and I go back a long way. We've done probably one of the most painful things that I do, which is play golf together. You know about my golf game better than most people, but you're also a really thoughtful person. And what I'm hoping that we can uncover today is a bit about the book you wrote, Giving a Damn. And the word damn is actually not damn, it's a different word. We'll get there, and we'll explain that in more detail, I think. And also how what you're trying to do with customer service translates to any small business. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get to this place where you're writing and thinking and talking about customer service?
That's a big question. First, let me say thank you. I appreciate you having me aboard and reconnecting. We haven't talked in quite a while. And I know a lot's changed in your world and things have changed in my world. And hopefully we will reconnect more often. But this is really, really fantastic. My life as far as customer service started many, many, many years ago. And it started when I started working in training in the hospitality industry. I worked for an AV company in the hospitality
Audiovisual
company, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just went.
No worries. And for whatever reason, they stuck me in the training department after years of working in the field and managing and leading in the field. And one of the things they wanted was build a leadership program and help us with customer service. And so I kind of went on that track and started writing and speaking and doing a lot of things in those two areas, leadership and service, and how those two things intersect and work together. And I, to your point about small businesses, I think this is a fundamental thing that can shift a small business to be able to, for lack of a better term, take on those big guys. Because this is an area that where if they focus on it, they can be a huge difference between them and the megalith who isn't thinking particularly about the relationships that they're building. So I really think this is important.
So I go to a lot of networking events, and I hear all the time people say, my insurance brokerage has the best customer service. Mm-hmm. My accounting firm, we are our customer service. Do you think that's true, or do you think that's faulty, or where do you see that? Because so many times when customer service comes up, all I hear is it's great, or the case where it's horrible. But no one talks about that.
I think it's a hard question to answer, to say whether somebody's is the best or not. I would have to say, one, no one's the best.
Okay.
And usually if somebody uses the term customer service, they're definitely not, because service is so much greater than customer service. Service isn't just about customer service. Service in an organization. Well, let me tell you a quick story to get to this. I was in an airport once I spoke to a CEO. It was a CEO of some small company. He was talking to, I think it was his CFO or somebody in his company. And they were talking, they were getting ready to go on this trip. I happened to overhear them. And one of the not CEO guy went to the restroom. I turned to the CEO and I said, I couldn't help but overhearing. What do you guys do? And he started to talk to me. There's some small IT company. And I started to tell him what I did. I said, I do a lot of training, leadership, customer service, this, that, and the other. And he looked at me, he said, you know what? I got a question for you. I've got to go to this meeting. We're meeting with our board. And that one of the things they're going to confront me with is that my service is not as good as it could be. And they would like it to be better. But honestly, I can't afford to hire more customer service reps. I can't do that. He said, what can I do? I said, can your customer service department? And he looked at me with just this look of fear. I said, you need to can your customer service department and make everybody in your company service. Every single person. Everybody in your company ought to be able to talk to a customer. Every single person in your company needs to think of themselves as a service provider, whether it's to the customer or whether it's to each other, because that's the only way you're going to up your service to everybody. Because what we do on the inside of the house is what people see on the outside of the house. If you're a parent and you go home and you yell at your kids all the time, guess what they're going to do on the playground? We need to be delivering a high level of service to each other so that we'll then deliver it to the customer outside of the company. So stop thinking of it as a department. Stop thinking of it as customer service. Just think of it as we're all in service. We're all here to be of service to each other and to customers.
How do you reconcile with that with the fact that a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, have had to make cuts since COVID, as the economy changes, that they don't have a lot of free time, a lot of extra positions to be able to do the kinds of things I think you're discussing in terms of really getting to know the customers, because they're on the hamster wheel.
Well,
what would you say to the small business owner struggling through that?
We need to think about what's more important, quality or productivity. And if it's quality, maybe we need to cut back. I mean, I hate to say it, but maybe, everybody talks about we need to grow, we need to grow, we need to grow. Well, is there a point where growth becomes your worst enemy? Is there a point where we've just got too much incoming? Well, maybe it's time to stop and let's go and say, okay, well, what's the line? What's the line where we need to say, okay, stop for a minute? I just worked with a small company who was having virtually this problem. And one of the things we came up with was, look, we need to be able to say to your salespeople, slow down because we can't service this much anymore. And that's exactly what they did. And what they saw was the quality of the relationships with the customers they had went up. It got better because they were able to spend that more time with the customer. And they saw a short drop in revenue because of it. But then they saw it pick right back up because those customers that they were servicing better started to buy more, started to do more with them. And so I think, I know it's scary, but to think, where's that line? Where is enough? Where can we say, okay, we need to cut it off and we need to really go back and look at servicing these people better and stop worrying about growth. The time for growth will come at some point, but maybe you just need to slow down.
One of the other challenges that I hear from small business owners all the time when I'm having discussions with them is, excuse me, it's hard to get good employees. It's really hard to get good people, much less people. So I'm working with a company where they had a couple of employees that were lackluster at best, but they plugged a hole. They could open the door. They could let the customer in. They could do those things. In that scenario, customer service is really way out in dream world. How do you reconcile that if you're talking to a small business owner in that situation?
Well, I think there's a couple of scary things. There's a lot of scary things when you're in a small business. One, you're usually working on a shoestring, and time is limited, people are limited. You've got a lot of constraints. And I'm going to add another one. You need to really think hard about what the expectations are. You need to look at people with a really serious microscope and say, look, these are the demands. And it's not just productivity demands, but it's human demands. I know you wrote several years ago, you wrote a book about soft skills. And I think that, and I talk about soft skills in my book. I don't call them soft skills, but I talk about them. And we need to really think about what are those skills that are required for the job outside of the technical ones. We need to have technical competencies, but you need to start looking at human competencies as well. What do people do well with other human beings? And quite honestly, they may be more important than those technical skills. You can train technical skills. I can teach virtually anybody to plug things in and do things.
That's what Mark Zuckerberg said. Give me someone with good soft skills and I can train the technical.
But soft skills or human skills are much more difficult to train. They are trainable, but it's just more difficult and more time consuming. So I think you need to be pickier from that perspective. And I think a lot of business owners, small and large, go out and hire, I've got to have somebody so they get a pulse to go sit in a chair and do a bunch of tasks. But at some point, that person has to pick up a phone or go out on the road or go somewhere and talk to somebody. And if they're not doing that well, all those tasks can be for naught. So I think it's important to really, really set a high bar for human expectation there.
So you subscribe to the theory that people buy the person, not the product or service?
I think they always buy the person first.
Okay.
If I don't trust you, and trust is everything, and we almost immediately decide on whether we're going to trust somebody or not. And we know that pretty quickly. If you look at the work of Susan Fiske at Princeton, where she talks, she has the stereotype content model, and she talks about the fact that the first thing we look for is human competencies, not technical competencies. Cave people, our earliest ancestors, they would, if they saw somebody coming and they were carrying a club, they thought, that person looks pretty big, like they could use that club, but they look pretty nice. They look like they're here to actually use it to defend me. Then we could become friends. But if they look like they were going to harm you, we couldn't become friends. So those human competencies, whether that person was good, what their intentions were, that's where we based our trust. So I think that we really need to look at that. Levels of trust are key.
Okay. Now, customer service, you've trained it, you've taught it, you've looked at it. Give me the 3 biggest customer service errors companies are making these days in your eyes.
Wow, that's a big question. I would say the first one and the most important one is they're not honest.
Okay. So give me an example, if you will.
Example of being dishonest. Bait and switch. They tell you one thing and then you get in the store and it's something very different. That's just dishonest.
Okay. So the fitness membership is X, Y, and Z. It looks really good on the flyer, but you get there and suddenly you can only go Tuesday and Thursday between 9 and 11 p.m.
When the moon is full.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
That kind of stuff, that kind of dishonesty. And it happens at all kinds of organizations. That's huge organizations, small ones. And we typically think of it with the huge organization. We think, they've done this. They do this kind of stuff all the time. But it happens in small organizations too. You go in and they say, well, we only do that during happy hour. Well, it ended 1 second ago. You know, that's not necessarily dishonest. It's just a little bit nickel and dimey. Yeah.
Or the business that says it can do something that it really has never done.
Yeah.
And says, oh, we do this all the time. I think that's another type of dishonesty I've experienced with clients and with other businesses where you find out later it's like they've never done this before. They are literally figuring it out in real time, but they sold you that they're as good as X company that does it every day.
And what they should do is direct you to a company that can do it. That I would trust. That I would come back to. And if you've ever seen the movie Miracle on 34th Street, the old one, the original black and white one, there's a great scene in that where Santa Claus tells this little boy, he says, we don't sell this here at Macy's, but they sell it across the street at Gimbel's.
Yeah.
And the toy department manager kind of freaks out. And he goes to Mr. Macy and he says, you can't believe it. This Santa Claus is telling people to go to other stores. And Mr. Macy says, that's brilliant. That's what we should be doing. Right. Because now every person's going to say, look at Macy's. Look what they're doing. They're doing the right thing.
Right.
And sure enough, of course, in the movie, that works out for them. But over and over and over in my personal experience, I've seen it work out for companies. When a company has said, we really don't do that, or that's not our expertise. Here's somebody who does, and we trust them. I come back to that original company over and over and over because they've been honest with me.
And they know their lane.
And they know their limits.
Right. Okay, that's one. Dishonesty. What's the second one?
Policies. Policies that are very clearly pro-company and not for the customer. I think that's a big
You're going to have to give me some examples of that.
Oh, wow. You're catching me off guard here. I'm trying to think of a good example of a policy. Just about anything airlines do. That they
okay. Wow. You and I are probably going to land in court on that one.
Airlines a lot of times they'll pawn off on the FAA a lot of things. Oh, these are FAA regulations. It's like, really? That's just crazy stupid. I was one time on an airline where a person wasn't on the flight, or they didn't know if a person was on the flight. And so they went through this rigorous process. And I asked the flight attendant, this is going to take a long time. She said, oh yeah, you're probably going to sit on the tarmac for 40 minutes, with this process, blah, blah. I said, why don't you just do a roll call? That'll take like 5 minutes. She said, well, FAA says we have to do that. Well, I went and looked. FAA doesn't say that. That was just some stupid policy of theirs that disregarded the customer. And I was just making a suggestion, and she kind of gave me this,
right?
No, you can't do that. You're dishonest. You're telling me that that's a policy. It's not. Or it's a federal regulation. It's not. And two, you've just made up a policy that's really for you, not for me. So companies do that. And I think that's poor business. That's in the past been called bad profits.
Okay. And then your third one, dishonesty, policies that favor the company. What's your third one?
The third thing that companies do is make things really, really difficult for customers. Do things that literally just get in the way of customers. For example, and this kind of comes back to my book. This is one of the things that kicked off writing this book. Back in 2019, my wife planned a trip for us to go to Spain. We were going to go to Madrid and Malaga and Barcelona, and she had it all planned out. My wife's very organized. She's very patient with these things. She figures it all out. She had the planes, trains, automobiles, hotels, all of that mapped out, all worked out. And then the pandemic hit, right? And when the pandemic hit, it was clear, okay, we need to kind of do a bunch of things to get vouchers and credits and whatever else, or, get our money back. And almost everything she had set up they made it really difficult to get things to happen. And it was very obvious. You're doing everything you can to keep money that's really not yours. And I understand you need fluid cash. You need cash flow. But that's just not right. You're making this really difficult for the customer, and it's obvious why. And she got really, really super frustrated with it. And so I think that is one of the things that companies do that are really harmful to customers. If they would have, and she did have a couple of companies who were literally like, yep, we know it's the pandemic and this is what we're going to do. And we got our money back. There was no jumping through hoops, no runarounds, no bouncing her from one person to another. It was just, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But the vast majority, it was a nightmare. It was jumping through hoops and, well, I need you to talk to this person. And she talked to that person and that person. No, you actually need to talk to this person. It was a lot of that, And so
one of the things I see often with the small business owners that I work with, coaching and helping to write books, is that in the beginning of their company, they really focus on their customer, trying to figure it out, trying to solve the problem for their customer. And then they get to a certain size or a certain revenue number, and the rules shift. And maybe being open until 6 o'clock to accommodate customers no longer is favorable because the owner says, you know what, I'm making enough money. I want to end at 3 o'clock so I can do X. And and that's a small example. And I think when I'm working with them on a book, especially, really focusing in on who their customers are and what they do or don't do and what they care about is often eye-opening to the business owner. Like they'll say all the time, I forgot about this. And I think that's part of what happens with customer service. At the beginning of a company, you'll do anything to make a customer happy. But as you start to generate more and more revenue, it seems like it shifts from that customer perspective to, all right, it's Bob time. What works best for Bob, not my customer? And is really that the core of all of this that you're talking about? When the day is done, that really is what you're tackling from customer service, right?
Almost every single one of these has to do with being self-interested. Every single one of these is about self-interest. And and that's kind of what brought me to writing the book was, I'll never forget my wife when she was dealing with all this. One day I was upstairs doing something and she hung up the phone and I heard her just out of total just frustration. She said, why is nothing ever easy? Why don't companies care about customers anymore? And wow, that just sent me reeling, and it set a lot of things in motion for me. Yeah, I think I know why, but I really wanted to dive into it and jump into the whys and look for, are the whys really true or not?
And your book goes way beyond just your thoughts. It's a lot of, you've got some scientific research in there. You've got some quotes from other people. This is not just Neal's eye view of the world.
It's only this big. It wouldn't have that much in it, but I did do a lot of research. I read a ton of stuff, and a lot of it was not in my favor. In fact, it got to one point where I was like, okay, maybe we just are all horribly self-centered, competitive, selfish beasts. Maybe that's just what we are. And I got kind of frustrated. And then I came across, and you know how this works. You read one book and it's like, oh, here's some research I haven't seen. And then that leads you to something else and to something else and to something else. So I ended up reading like 4 or 5 books.
The research rabbit hole.
Yeah. And like 5 books in a row that were like, oh my gosh, this is countering all of this stuff that was frustrating me. And now I'm seeing something different, And so I found some really, really interesting stuff having to do with human self-interest that we've all bought into, but isn't necessarily true, if you will.
So is your book written to a small business owner, to a corporate CEO, to a mid-level manager, to an employee, help me understand, because I think they could all be served, but what was your original intent or your audience in your head?
Two different audiences all at once, and I cover both of them. One is an individual contributor who says, you know what? Our company can be so much better than it is. We can provide such a great experience for our customers. I want to do that. I want to be the person who begins to move that monster. And so it's got that in it. It's also for somebody, it could be for a CEO of a company, or even a high-level manager of a company, or a small business owner. And to be quite honest, a small business owner, it's perfect. In fact, I had a couple of people that I've sent the book to who are starting a business, said, read this, start this way. If you start it this way, you won't be changing it up later when you see, wow, I've gone in the wrong direction. So
okay,
I think, yes.
How do you see? How do you see leadership dovetailing with customer service? Because those are your two areas of expertise. Where do they merge or do they not?
They absolutely do merge. First of all, let's get away from the idea of customer service and let's just talk about service briefly.
Okay.
Service is, if you're looking for a definition, at least my definition, service is pretty simple. It's just helping people. Whenever we do something that helps somebody else accomplish something or achieve something, you're providing service. And we do it all day, every day. You get up in the morning. If you have kids and you help them get ready for school, service. If you take your kids to the bus stop, service. If you go into work and you help somebody with a report, service. You buy milk on the way home, service. We do service all the time. We just don't recognize it that way. But we're constantly being of service to other people in our lives, and to our families, sometimes even to ourselves. So that's the first thing. When we think about leadership, one thing leaders have to do for organizations is they have to be examples. They have to be examples of what behaviors they want others to demonstrate. And a really good leader will do that. Whether it's a team leader, whether it's an authority figure, or whether it's somebody just a contributor who wants to up the game of the people around them, and they're not officially a titled leader, they can demonstrate behaviors that make others go, I want to be like them. They're really good, and I respect what they do. So you just became a leader. And I think when you are trying to up other people's games and help them, you're providing service. And that's really what great leadership does. It's of service to others. And please, let's be clear. When I say that, I'm not saying being in service of, I'm saying being of service to. When you are in service of someone, there is a hierarchy. When you're in service of someone, it's like I'm your butler. That's different. But when you are of service to someone, you are bringing them something of value that helps them either get better, do better, accomplish something. And sometimes that service, being of service to someone, can be saying no. So if you're a manager and you say to an employee, no, we really can't do that. We may be able to do it a month from now, but we can't do it right now. And I know that is crushing your enthusiasm, but right now is not the time. And sometimes that's the best thing they can do to be of service to their teams, which is very different of being in service of. So I hope that's clear.
Okay. That makes sense.
So when it comes to an organization, leaders need to do a couple of things. If you want your organization to be a good service organization, they need to be constantly messaging that as a priority. If you walk into any Ritz-Carlton, going down a back hallway, you're going to see somewhere it's going to say, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. That is their motto. You will see it everywhere. And believe me, I've been in enough Ritz-Carltons and I've been in the back hallways of Ritz-Carltons and I've seen it a million times. In fact, every Ritz-Carlton employee typically has a little card in their wallet, and the first thing on it is, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Service is what they do. It is their priority. Yeah. It's message constantly. Second thing leaders have to do is be examples. If you want people to treat customers well, then you better be treating your employees well. You better be treating the people that look up to you. You need to be treating them with human care, just like you expect them to treat a customer. So there's a definite overlap of service and leadership. I think the two are linked, so to speak.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
In regards to millennials, okay,
Yeah.
millennials, they are taking over leadership roles in a lot of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
There are the critics of millennials who say they're used to getting their way, everything goes their way, they weren't challenged, they got participation trophies. Now they're moving into leadership roles. How does that help or hinder customer service in organizations as you see it?
Well, first of all, I hate putting stereotypical roles or labels on people like that. I have a millennial child myself who I would say is not like that.
Okay.
And that's not, and I'm pretty quick to criticize if I think my children are. So don't take that as me being, it's my child and he's perfect. He's not. He's a great kid, but I don't see him thinking that way. So I think that's a generalization. I also think that we need to be able to give people, instead of labeling people, you need to give them tools and give them the expectations clearly. I think if you hire a millennial, give them the expectation. This is what I expect. This is exactly how I see the work going and how things should be. While at the same time, I think you should be asking them, what do you think? What do you think what kinds of things do you see in your world that influence what's going on in this world? I think for, someone who's, older folks who are in organizations, you're 45, 50, 55 years old. We don't live in the world you were probably brought up in now. It's changed. And there are many things that I will turn to my son and say, what do you see in your world? What do you see with the people that you work with that I'm not seeing because I'm not in your world? And he'll give me some of that. And it's an important information because it's not just your employees that are in that world. Your customers are too. And you need to understand it. And sometimes the best people to talk to is that person you just hired they're young and they may be to a degree a pain to you because you were brought up in a different world, but you need to understand their world. And so I think we miss the boat when we don't include them in the conversation.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some writer questions because you've now authored 2 books, correct?
Yes.
How much easier was the second book than the first book to write?
Harder, to be quite honest.
Oh.
And it was harder because I structured it very differently. The first book was basically
which was the Uncomplicated Coach, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was. And in that book, I wrote it based on a model. I used Patrick Lencioni's books as a model. And Patrick Lencioni always writes a business fable followed by a section that is kind of the textbook part. And I modeled the book that way. The beginning was a story, and I walked through this whole story where one person taught somebody else how to coach. And in the back half of the book was, okay, here's the skinny on all that. Here's kind of so you could really read the front or the first half or the second half. If you're the kind of person that likes the textbooky stuff and likes that kind of detail, you read the second half. You could read the first half if you like a story, or read it all if you like it all, and still get the meat of the matter. This book took a long time for me to figure out how to put the chicken, which came first, chicken or egg. There were a lot of instances where I was doing a lot of, I kind of have to talk about this to talk about this. Or is it the other way around? I did a lot of that kind of finagling with stuff. In fact, I outlined it several times in PowerPoint slides because I could take PowerPoint slides and move them around. And I would walk around my office talking through the whole thing to see if it was a coherent story from beginning to end.
Okay.
And so it just took me forever. And the research that I did on this book was a lot. There's just a lot more research that I had to do.
And where do you see the value of the book? Because there are a million different ways to get your message out. You could be on podcasts like this. You could be doing a blog. You could be doing YouTube videos. You could be doing speaking. There are a lot of avenues. Why this avenue for you?
A few things. One, I blog, and I blog regularly. I blog every week. I post the blog on my website, and to people who follow me, and I enjoy it, and I enjoy the book thing. I just literally enjoy. I didn't think that I would, and I don't think that I'm a great writer. But I just enjoy it. I enjoy the whole process. I enjoy doing it and sitting down and kind of fighting with myself over the process and sending it to people and saying, hey, read this. And they come back and say, well, you need to move this or change this. And in fact, I had a whole draft done and I sent it to somebody, a friend of ours, who read it. And he said, you need to move this whole piece to the beginning or it won't make any sense. And it basically made me almost rewrite the whole thing, which was a total pain, a total pain. But he was absolutely right, So yes, I enjoy it. I like doing it. I also think that there's something about books and longevity. Books outlive you, and whether in my lifetime, if somebody a handful of people read it, maybe 30 years from now, somebody goes, hey, this book was fantastic. And all of a sudden a bunch of people read it and it changes the world. Great. I think there's that part of books. And I am not, quite honestly, really, really comfortable with holding a phone up and talking about stuff and throwing it up on YouTube. And I think there's a lot of that. And I see it and I'm like, oh, okay. And maybe I should, because I've had a lot of people, I do a lot of speaking and people tend to like it, but there's something about standing in front of a camera and doing it that's just not the same as standing on a stage and talking to a bunch of people. So maybe I should get comfortable with it, but I'm just not as comfortable with it. So I tend to try to write to cover some of that.
So tell me your biggest customer service flaw in your career and how you resolved it.
Flaw? My flaw?
Yeah, a situation where you had really bad customer service and how you corrected it.
There's been a bunch. And early on in my career,
as with all of us,
early on in my career, and this is kind of educational as well. Early on in my career, no one really teaches you customer service. Nobody teaches you about service. You kind of pick it up. And I was very fortunate to learn a lot working in the restaurant business. When I went to grad school, I started working in the restaurant business to help myself get through grad school. And then when I first moved to Baltimore, I worked in a restaurant for a couple of years, and the restaurant business taught me a lot, just by kind of default. But then I went and worked in a business, and then it was years later that I finally got into working in the hospitality sector, doing audiovisual service. And mistakes I made there were typically frustration with people, and having worked all day on something and have them want some little thing or what they thought was some little change that wasn't such a little change, and it would be huge. And knowing that this is going to now take me 3 or 4 more hours, and I really wanted to go home. And the lesson and the way I resolved it was looking at my own team members and seeing the impact that had on them. I was supposed to be the leader, and here I am, and I'm doing things that aren't right. And I knew they weren't right. And seeing that it was impacting them, i.e. they were beginning to do things like that, and knowing that's not right. I'm supposed to be leading by example. I need to be a better example. So my resolution of that was learning to be a better leader.
Okay. Nice. All right. So that brought you to leadership. And now, do you have another book coming? Have you thought of another book or no?
Actually, I've got a couple of possibilities in line. One is, and I'm just, again, toying with ideas at this point. One is about stepping up your work, elevating your work to, most of us work every day in everyday jobs, doing everyday work, right? And most of us aren't. People say this all the time. You need to do what you love. And I'm the first one to say, but most of us can't do what we love. If everybody did what they love, everybody be a rock star and a movie star. We don't all have that opportunity. But I think you do have an opportunity to do or to love what you do. And what I mean by that is to put love into what you do. And it can transform what you do, even mundane jobs. And there's a great video of this guy called the Popcorn Guy. And he's out in, I think he's in either Texas or Arizona. Anyway, he makes popcorn in a movie theater, and he does it in a magnificent way. Like he takes the popcorn thing and he spins it and he puts popcorn in and he does this whole show and hands it to customers. And they all clap. And now people come there just to see this guy do this thing. And in fact, he got invited to do it at the Oscars. I think Jimmy Kimmel saw him. Jimmy Kimmel saw him on a video and said, hey, we want you to do it in the lobby of the Oscars. And they invited this kid to do it. My point using that example is that you can take any mundane job and turn it into something spectacular if you really want to. If you think about making your job something that's phenomenal. And so I've toyed with writing something around that. The other is to take some really basic principles of service and put them into not a manual, but kind of something you can go to as almost like a reference and say, okay, I need to learn more about compassion. I need to learn more about curiosity. I need to be more creative. And I'm basing it, I would base it around kind of 5 key behaviors. So, those are two possibilities that are floating around out there.
Okay. So, Neal, before we get to what I warned you about, the Bob Graham experience, where I'm going to ask you 5 deeply penetrating questions and hopefully get 1 sentence answers each, I want to give you a chance to plug anything and everything you want to. So tell us how we can reach you. Tell us about your book, how we can get your book, anything else that you want to walk through. Go.
Book, Shameless Self-Promotion. And it has a funky title. Yes. Giving a damn if you want to make it more family friendly.
Where'd that title come from? How did we get to that title?
It's interesting. I was actually playing golf one day, and or what I like to call chasing a white ball. That's typically what I end up doing. Playing golf one Saturday morning, and there were 4 guys talking, and one of the guys owns his own business, and we got talking. He knows what I do, and I work with leadership and service. And he said, I've always wanted to ask you, what's one thing I can tell my employees so that they'll deliver the best service? Well, that set me my mind went going 100 miles an hour. And you know how time slows down in that moment and you're thinking of everything. And finally, for some reason, I just looked at him. I said, you got to give a damn. And he just kind of looked at me slack jawed. And he said, is that it? And I said, well, sort of. But what it really means is it's not just about your frontline employees. You have to, your administrative team has to, your exec team has to, your managers have to, and your frontline employees have to. Because if everybody's not doing it, if everybody's not serving each other, then your organization can't truly serve the customer. So it starts with you and it filters down to everybody in the organization. And
so you had the title before the book.
Long before. In fact, a couple of years before.
That's pretty unusual.
Yeah. I mean, and when I started working on the book, I thought, this is great because this is kind of what this book is about, ultimately. So it worked out really well. So anyway, plugging things. The book is available on Amazon. You just go to Amazon, dial up my name. It actually is kind of hard to search the title because of the the
Yeah.
$ thing that,
And
so
it's
if you
Neal,
just go on and search
Neal.
Neal Woodson, Woodson. If you just search that, you can find the book. It is very reasonably priced if you're worried about that. And if you do get it and you're interested, you can reach out to me. You can find my email address is on my LinkedIn page. So you can reach me through LinkedIn. I love to connect with people. I also post on Instagram and X, i.e. Twitter. I post a lot there. Also, I have a website, nealwoodson.net, nealwoodson.net. Feel free. I post a lot there. There's some resources there. There's a list of a book list there. There's a video list there. There's all kinds of things there for you to chew on. And if you are interested and have questions, leave some comments and I'll get back to you. So plugging myself.
Well, Neal, I can't postpone it anymore.
All right.
It's time for the Bob Graham experience. You ready?
Here you go.
As best as possible, 1-sentence answers to the questions. All right, you ready? First of all, the last thing you read.
Last thing I read. All of a sudden I'm drawing a blank. A book by Matt Tenney called Inspire Greatness.
Okay, good. Your most important inspiration.
My inspiration comes from my why. And my why is to help people help others help people. So that's my personal inspiration and something I think about pretty much daily.
Nice. Your biggest daily challenge.
Probably really getting focus on one thing, because I tend to have a lot of things on that are going on, and I'm a creative type who, like you just heard, I've got 2 book possibilities sitting out there, and just getting real focus on that one key thing.
Okay. And your guiding principle.
I'm not sure there's one, but it's all
you can more than one.
Wrapped up in being honest and having integrity. If I say I'm going to do something, holding myself to my feet to the flame and say I'll do it. I've become, as I've gotten older, much more careful with what I'll say I will do because of that. And making promises to people. If I'm not going to keep them, I don't make the promise. So yeah, integrity is a big one. Honesty is a big one, and a tough one. And I think people don't pay enough attention to it. It's a tough one to keep, because it's so easy to tell the white lie and that kind of thing. So, being very honest with people. So.
Okay. Last question for you. A skill you didn't know you had that you rely on a lot now. A skill you didn't know you had that you rely on a lot now.
I would say it might be writing. I never thought I could write anything for the longest time. And then years ago, I started writing things and people started reading them. And so, and you being a really good writer might think differently about that, but being able to write things that people read and come back and say, that did something for me, moved me, whatever. That's something I never thought I'd be able to do. So.
Okay, great. And one bonus question, because I know you read everything under the sun. You're probably one of the most well-read people in the world to me. What's one book you recommend every single person has got to read?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And you ask questions like this, and all of a sudden I just draw a big blank.
It's part of my gift.
If you're aspiring to be a leader, I would say you need to read Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I think that's a really good book. The list keeps going on. Almost anything by Stephen Covey. The 8th Habit was a book that really changed me a lot, which is actually not very easy to find, but you can often find it in used bookstores. But it's called The 8th Habit. It's the kind of follow-up to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. But I found it more resonant particularly for like a small business owner. I would find it to be a pretty powerful book.
Okay. Well, great. Neal, you've survived the Bob Graham experience.
Wow.
You're in a select crowd. I know. You didn't know. When we first met playing golf, you had no idea it would come to this. And now look at you.
I never knew we'd come to a lot of things, Bob. Usually what we came to was standing knee deep in water looking for a ball.
Quit talking that way, Neal. Come on. So, folks, this is Neal Woodson. His books are great. His Instagram feed I love because he puts really thoughtful sentences in big letters with nice, pretty colors behind it, and they always make me think. So if nothing else, go to Instagram, find Neal Woodson. And Neal, thank you so much for being here. You shed some light on an area that I think is absolutely critical to business and often gets lost in the shuffle. So thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure and great to see you again.
We have to do it more frequently.
That was the Bob Graham Experience. Want to be a guest and experience it for yourself? Visit thebobgrahamexperience.com to get on the list. And of course, please rate us and listen to other episodes wherever you had the Bob Graham Experience. Until next time.